The whole town branded her damaged goods. The lumberjack married her anyway. The axe handle had a crack in it. I noticed it the morning everything started, not because it mattered much. Handle cracks are just part of the work, but because I'd been staring at that axe too long, trying not to look at the window of the mercantile across the road. She was inside. I could see the shape of her through the glass. Me Coulter. And old Dunnigan behind the counter wasn't selling her anything. I didn't know her yet. Not really. I knew what men said, which is to say I knew nothing at all, because in Harlan Creek what men said and what was true had almost no acquaintance with each other. What I knew was this. She'd come west 2 years back with a husband named Coulter who died before he ever got his boots dirty on his own land, and the circumstances of his dying had a shadow over them that the town had decided to place on her. I never knew the whole of it. A fire, a debt, a cousin of Coulter's who had a loud mouth and a reason to want the widow blamed. That's all I had. I didn't need more. I went inside the mercantile. She was standing at the counter with a short list in her hand. Good dress, worn thin at the elbows. She was holding herself careful, the way a person holds themselves when they're expecting a door in the face. Dunnigan had his arms crossed and was looking somewhere slightly to the left of her ear. "Help you, Calhoun," he said when he saw me. I put $2 on the counter, said what was on her list like I'd memorized it, which I hadn't. I just repeated what she'd been asking for. Flour, salt, lamp oil, 2 yards of plain muslin. Dunnigan looked at the money, looked at me. I didn't say anything else. He filled the order. She didn't speak while we were in there. Didn't look at me. I carried the things out to her wagon because they were heavy and she didn't argue about it, which told me she was more tired than proud at that particular moment. Then she said, "I don't know you." "No," I said. "Calhoun, I run the mill up the North Fork." She looked at the parcels in the wagon bed. "I didn't ask for charity. Didn't offer any. I need a hand keeping books at the mill. I can't do the figures right and it costs me." I didn't know where the words came from. I hadn't needed a bookkeeper in my life. But I watched her face and it was the right thing, not because it softened her, because it didn't. She stayed level. She didn't look relieved or grateful. She just looked at me steady, measuring whether I was honest. "I can keep books," she said. "Mill's a mile past Hester's farm on the North Road. 7 in the morning if you want the work." I walked back for my axe. Didn't look back at her. The handle was cracked, but it held for another 2 weeks. She showed up at 6:45 the first morning. I was in the yard splitting rounds when I heard her wagon. She came down the lane, set the brake herself, climbed down herself, and stood looking at the mill building. The river was running fast that week, cold and green. The wheel was turning. I showed her the books. They were a mess. I knew it. I'm a man who understands timber and water and how to run a blade true, but columns of numbers go sideways on me, always have. She sat at the table inside the office shed and worked through them without a word. An hour and she put her pen down and said, "You've been undercounting your board feet against Harker and Sons for 2 years." I stood there. "They've been getting 30% more lumber than they've been paying for," she said. "Either they're cheating you or someone's been writing the tallies wrong. Either way you're owed $460. That's what she found by noon. I didn't say much. I paid her for the morning, asked if she'd come back tomorrow. She said she would. She went home. I sat there a good while looking at those numbers she'd corrected in her tight, careful hand. I wasn't a man who trusted quick. I'd come to Harlan Creek from Missouri 8 years before with a bad faith partnership behind me and a mistrust of people that sat in my chest like a stone. I'd built the mill alone, run it alone, liked it that way. The solitude wasn't loneliness, or I'd told myself that long enough that I'd stopped checking whether it was true. But I looked at her handwriting in those ledgers, and something in me was paying attention. She came back every morning for 3 weeks. I learned her in pieces. The way she moved around the mill, careful at first, then not just efficient. She had opinions about wood. She'd grown up on a farm in Ohio and her father had kept everything in good order, she said, and she said it without sentimentality, just as a fact. Her hands were strong. She made coffee without being asked and it was better than what I made. She didn't talk about the town and I didn't ask. But I heard things. I always heard things whether I wanted to or not. Graydon's wife said me, Coulter had probably set the fire herself. Pearl Hester, who ran the dry goods the next town over, told me flat that a woman with me Coulter's reputation wasn't fit company for decent people, as if me had a reputation rather than an accusation hanging over her. The cousin, Coulter's cousin, man named Fitch, had been through twice that spring and each time he left her name dirtier than he'd found it. I didn't say anything to any of them, but one afternoon when me was packing her bag to leave, I said, Fitch came through. She went still just for a moment. I know, she said. What does he want? Long pause. The land, the Coulter parcel, it's in my name. He says it should have come to him. Can he take it? He can make it so no one will buy it from me. He's managed that much already. She put the strap of her bag over her shoulder. I'll figure it out. She said it simply, not bravely. It was just a statement of intention. She'd been figuring things out a long time. After she left, I sat on the step of the mill and watched the river a while. The wheel turned. The water didn't care about Fitch or about me Coulter's reputation or about any of it. I liked rivers for that reason. The thing that decided me wasn't one thing. It was accumulation. It was the way she worked, clean and honest, without theater. It was the morning she caught one of my timber hands trying to short a load going out to Harker's, wrote it down and brought it to me and looked me level when she did it. It was the afternoon the older of my two mules got a stone bruise and she climbed down off her wagon and dealt with it herself, just because she was there and knew how, and then washed her hands at the pump and went back inside to finish the column she'd been on. It was the fact that she never once asked for anything she didn't earn, never asked me to fight her battles, never looked at me like I was a solution to a problem. She looked at me like I was a person. That sounds like a small thing and maybe it was. But after 8 years of Harlan Creek, where I was either Calhoun the mill man, useful, solitary, left alone, or Calhoun the man with money, which was a different thing to want me for, it wasn't small. I started staying later when she was there. Started finding reasons to be in the office while she worked. She noticed. She didn't say anything about it for a long time and then one evening, she'd stayed late herself, working through an invoice she wanted to finish. She looked up and said, "Are you going to keep standing in doorways or are you going to sit down?" I sat down. We talked for 2 hours. About Ohio and Missouri and why people go west and whether it was worth it and what a person does when the thing they came west for turns to ash. She was direct without being hard. She laughed once, low and unexpected, at something I said, and I felt it land in the center of my chest. She left when it was nearly dark. I went back inside and sat at the table where she'd been working and looked at her handwriting in the ledger a long time. Fitch came back in June. He came to the mill this time, not to her. Rode in on a big gray horse, looking like a man who wanted to seem bigger than he was. He had 2 men with him who were hired for the size of them and nothing else. He told me Coulter was trouble. Said it the way men say things when they're feeling out where you stand. Said she'd run a good man into the ground and probably helped him burn. I was fitting a new guide on the saw blade. I kept working while he talked. When he finished, I said, "She works for me." He said something about that being my business, but he'd want me to know. The word he used was reputation, my reputation, being seen with a woman like that. I set the guy down, turned around and looked at him. I'm not a man who's quick to anger. I've known men who are, and it's mostly wasted energy. But there's a kind of anger that isn't heat, it's just clarity. That's what I had. Very clear. I told him me Coulter was an honest woman and a fair worker, and that I didn't have much use for what he thought about it. I told him the Coulter parcel was hers, and if he came near it or near her again, I would make sure the county recorder knew everything I knew about the debt arrangements his cousin died under, which by then was quite a lot, because Me had told me most of it one evening, and what she hadn't told me I'd found in the back of the ledger where her late husband had kept notes. Fitch's face went a color I didn't have a name for. He left, his 2 hired men left with him. I went back to the guide fitting. Me found out about it. I don't know how, someone saw, someone told, the way things travel in a valley that small. She came to the mill the next morning and she stood in the doorway a moment before she came in. I was at the wheel housing. She said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," I said. She stood there a moment, then she said, "He'll come back harder." "Maybe." I turned back to what I was doing. "Be ready for him if he does." She was quiet a long time, then she said, "Calhoun." I looked at her. She didn't say anything for a second, just looked at me the way she had that first day measuring. But this time what she was measuring was something different, not whether I was honest, something past that. "Thank you," she said, quiet and plain. I nodded, went back to work, felt her watching me for a moment before she came inside. I want to be honest about what happened in me that summer, because men don't often say it plain, and maybe they should. I'd been alone a long time. Not unhappy with it, the way I said. But there's a difference between being at peace with a thing and having chosen it freely, and I'd made a kind of peace with solitude because the alternative had always seemed like it would cost me more than it gave. I'd watched men get taken apart by women, by the wanting of them, by the losing of them, and I'd kept a distance from all of that the way you keep a distance from the edge of a bluff in high wind. Me didn't pull me off any edge. She just made the solitude heavier by comparison, made me aware of what it had been costing. You don't know the weight of a thing until you set it down for a moment, and she was, without meaning to be, without trying to be, a moment's relief from it. I didn't say any of this. I kept working, kept being careful, kept the distance I always kept. And then one morning in August, her wagon wasn't in the lane at 7 o'clock, and it wasn't there at 8, and by 9 I was saddling my horse. She hadn't come to harm. I want to say that fast because the thing that actually happened is smaller and worse in a different way. She'd gone to the land office to sign some papers on the Coulter parcel, a refinement of the deed that her lawyer had set up to make Fitch's claim harder. She'd told me about this the week before. I'd forgotten the date. What happened was the 2 other people at the land office that morning had refused to witness her signature. One of them was Graydon, the man whose wife said those things. They told her they wouldn't put their names on anything connected to me, Coulter, and the clerk had been no help, and she'd ridden back. I found her at the small house she rented on the edge of town. She opened the door and told me what happened in about 4 sentences, flat and factual. She wasn't crying. I don't think she cried much, me, but there was something around her eyes and in the set of her mouth. I asked her who her lawyer was. She told me. I rode to his office, got the papers, rode back, witnessed her signature myself. Then I rode to find the 2 men she needed from outside town who would witness it without prejudice, took most of the afternoon, and we had the deed recorded by 5 o'clock. When I brought her the recorded copy, she held it with both hands and looked at it a long time. "That's your land," I said. She looked up at me. Something had shifted in her face. Not emotion. She wasn't a woman who wore emotion on the surface. It was one of the things I'd come to understand about her. It was something quieter, like something that had been held very tightly for a long time had loosened, just slightly, just enough. "Calhoun," she said. "It's just paperwork," I said. "You know it isn't." Her voice was even. She was just correcting me the way she'd correct a figure in the ledger. I stood there. The light was going orange through her window, the kind of August light that sits horizontal and warm on everything it touches. "No," I said. "I know it isn't." She looked at me. I looked at her. There were about 2 feet of space between us, and it was the loudest 2 feet I'd ever stood in. I said, "I'm going to ask you something, and I'd like you to tell me the truth of it." She waited. "Is any of what they say true?" Not an accusation, not doubt. I want to be clear about what I meant by it. I'd already made up my mind about me Coulter 6 weeks before, but she deserved to be asked, not just believed in silently, because being believed in silently is a lonelier thing than it sounds. I wanted her to know I was asking, and that I'd already decided it didn't change anything either way. She held my eyes. "No," she said. "I didn't think so," I said. "I wanted you to know you could say it to someone." Her jaw moved. Just slightly. She looked down at the deed in her hands and then back up at me. "What is it you want, Calhoun?" she said, quiet. "I'd like to court you," I said, "if you're willing." She was still for a moment. Then she laughed, low and short, not at me, just the surprise of it. It was the second time I'd heard her laugh, and it was still in the middle of my chest. "You pick your moments," she said. "I've been thinking about it since March." She looked at me. "I'm a complicated situation." "I know what you are," I said. "I've been watching you work for 5 months." She was quiet, then she said, "I'm not easy company." "Neither am I." Another quiet. The light through the window. Somewhere outside a door closed and someone's horse went past on the road. "All right," she said. Steady, like she was agreeing to a reasonable arrangement. I want to say it went smooth after that. It didn't entirely. Fitch came back in September like she'd said he would, harder this time, tried to bring a case through the county that would have tied up the land for years. We beat it, me and her lawyer and me providing letters about the debt records. It took 4 months. She didn't sleep well during those months. I knew because she had shadows under her eyes and because she told me, one night in October, which was the first time she told me a thing like that. A crack in the practical surface. I didn't make a big thing of it. I said it would come out right. She said she wasn't sure of that. I said I was. She looked at me for a moment and then nodded, not because I'd convinced her exactly, but because I'd said it plain and she knew I didn't say things I didn't mean. The case was dismissed in December. The night we got word she came to the mill because that's where I was, working late, and she came in and put her hand on my arm and just stood there a moment. My hand came up and covered hers without me thinking about it. We stood like that in the lamplight, not saying anything. The wheel was still that time of year. River low, just the lamp and the quiet. "It's done," she said. "Yes," I said. Her hand was cold from the ride and I kept mine over it. After a while I said, "I'd like to marry you, me." She was quiet. "Then why?" "Because you're honest and capable, and because this valley is better for having you in it. Because you've done right by me and I'd like to do right by you. And because when you're not here the mill seems quieter than a mill ought to be." I felt her exhale, a long, slow thing. "That's a strange reason," she said. "The last part." "It's the truest part." She turned and looked up at me. I was taller by most of a foot and she had to tip her head back. Her eyes were dark and straight on mine. "You know what you're taking on," she said. "This town." "I know this town," I said. "I've been here 8 years. They can think what they want. They'll talk." "They already do." I looked down at her. "I'm not marrying the town." Something moved across her face. Something she was keeping in place with effort, and then she stopped keeping it in place, just for a moment, and what was underneath it was something I recognized. The same thing I'd been carrying around since March. The same weight I'd been calling solitude and she'd probably been calling something harder. "All right," she said. Same even voice as before, same levelness. But her hand turned under mine and held it. That was new. Her fingers interlaced with mine and held on, not dramatically, not for long, just a moment, telling me something she hadn't put words to and didn't need to. We were married in February by the circuit preacher, in the main room of the mill because the church wouldn't have her, and I wouldn't have the church on those terms. 6 people came. Her lawyer and his wife, who'd been decent to her. 2 of my timber hands. An old woman named Edith who ran the laundry and had never once joined in the talk against me, just quietly, steadily, hadn't joined in. And Pearl Hester, who'd said those things about me's reputation to me 2 years before, rode 20 miles in the cold to come and stand in the back of the room. She'd had a conversation with herself about it, I heard later. I don't know what she worked out. She was there. That's what mattered. Me wore her good dress, the one with the worn elbows. She'd repaired the elbows with some different fabric that didn't quite match, and she'd done it carefully, and it looked fine. She was not a woman who worried much about things that didn't quite match. The preacher was brief. Me said what she said in a clear voice, and she looked at me when she said it, not at the floor, not past me. Straight at me. I said what I said and meant every word of it. Afterward she stood next to me while the 6 people offered their words, and her shoulder was against my arm, and she stayed there the whole time. Not clinging, just placed as something settled. Edith from the laundry took me's hand and said she was a fine woman, and it showed. Me said thank you, and her voice was perfectly level. I knew what it cost her to keep it level. The town shifted, not all at once and not all the way, some of them never shifted. But a town has a shape that moves when the people in it move, and enough people had watched what happened with Fitch, and what happened with the deed, and what happened when I stood in Dunnigan's and put $2 on the counter, and they'd done their own arithmetic. By spring me was buying her own supplies from Dunnigan without incident. I was there the first time, standing nearby not because she needed me to be, but because I wanted her to know someone was close. She didn't need me. Dunnigan filled her order. She paid and carried it out, and I carried the heavier things, and she didn't say I told you so, she just drove us home. The Coulter land she sold in the end, got a fair price for it, which she wouldn't have gotten 2 years before. She put the money toward the mill. Her name is on the deed of the mill now, alongside mine. She put it there because she'd earned it, which she had, and because I asked her to, which she deserved. The work is the work. I cut timber, the wheel turns, the boards go out. She keeps the books straight and true, not a figure out of place. In the evening she reads. In the mornings before I'm up there's coffee on, and it's better than what I make. In the summer she grows beans and tomatoes in a kitchen garden she put in along the south wall of the mill office. She says she likes watching things grow without interference. I know what she means. There's a thing I've thought about on winter mornings, when the valley's still and the river's low and I'm the first one up, and I'm standing with my coffee looking out at the wheel. About what those years cost, the alone ones. 8 years of the stone in my chest. I don't regret much. I came west, I built the mill, the work was real and mine. But I think about me standing at that counter with Dunnigan's arms crossed and her list in her hand, holding herself careful. 2 years of that before I walked in. 2 years of a town deciding what she was before she got to say a word. I walked in and put $2 down. Not heroic, not complicated, just a man deciding that a woman holding a list deserved to fill her list. The rest came from that, what she was, what I am, the arithmetic of 2 people figuring that neither of them had to be as alone as they'd been. I'm not given to speeches, never have been. But I'll say this, which is true. There is no part of my life that isn't better for the fact that me Coulter looked at me that day and decided I was worth measuring. A woman like that, honest and capable and no one's fool, she doesn't do a man the honor of measuring him unless she thinks the result might be worth knowing. She thought I was worth knowing. She was right about the ledgers and about the deed and about Fitch coming back harder. She's right about most things. She's right about me. I know that because she tells me, not with speeches, not often, but in the particular way she has of being present, of staying, of putting her shoulder against my arm in a room full of people who'd wronged her and being there solid and certain, as if she'd taken a survey of her options and made her decision, and the decision was final. That's what I carry, not the noise the town made, Not Fitch and his gray horse, not the long alone years before. What I carry is the lamp in the mill office on a December night, and her cold hand turning in mine. That's enough for any man.